Dawn breaks across the endless grassland like a slow burn, painting the horizon in shades of amber and rust. The wind carries more than just the scent of prairie sage and wild grass. It carries the breath of 10,000 buffalo, their massive bodies creating a living earthquake that trembles through the earth beneath bare feet. This is the world before horses, before steel, before the thunder of hooves belonged to anything but the great herds themselves. Here, on the vast plains of what will someday be called the American heartland, survival means understanding that you are not the apex predator. You are simply clever enough to turn the land itself into your weapon. The elder crouches beside a depression in the earth, his weathered fingers tracing the edge of a hoof print larger than his outstretched hand. The print tells him everything he needs to know. The buffalo passed this way before the morning dew. Moving northeast toward the river breaks where the coulees cut deep into the prairie. His eyes, sharp despite his 60 winters, scan the trampled grass for the subtle signs that separate a successful hunt from starvation. The bent stems point toward water, the scattered dung steams fresh in the cool air, and the very ground vibrates with the distant rumble of the main herd. But reading the signs requires more than just recognizing obvious tracks. The elder's trained gaze picks out details that would escape even experienced hunters from other tribes. The depth of the hoof print in relation to the hardness of the soil tells him the weight of the animal that made it. A slight asymmetry in the impression suggests a buffalo favoring one leg, perhaps due to injury or age, which could affect the herd's movement patterns. The spacing between prints reveals whether the animals were grazing peacefully or moving with purpose toward water or better pasture. Even more subtle are the signs left by the buffalo's behavior rather than their bodies. Patches of grass rubbed smooth against favorite scratching spots. Mud wallows still damp with recent use. The distinctive scent markers where dominant bulls have marked territory. All of these details combine to create a map of buffalo activity that stretches back days or even weeks. The elder reads this landscape like a vast book written in a language that exists nowhere but in the accumulated knowledge of plains hunters who learn to see the world through buffalo eyes. Behind him, 12 hunters wait in silence, their bodies painted with ochre and charcoal, their faces set with the concentration of men who understand that today will either feed their families for the winter or leave them facing the hungry months ahead with empty hands. Each man carries a bow carved from Osage orange wood, arrows tipped with carefully knapped flint points, and the knowledge passed down through countless generations of hunters who learned to read the land like a sacred text written in hoof prints and wind direction. But what separates today from the dozens of unsuccessful hunts that fill the long stretches between victories is something indefinable in the air itself, a combination of weather patterns, buffalo behavior, and human preparation that creates the perfect storm of opportunity. The lead runner, a young man whose legs can carry him faster and farther than any horse yet imagined, kneels beside the elder to study the track patterns. His trained eye picks out the subtle differences between a cow's print and a bull's, between the measured pace of grazing animals and the urgent stride of a spooked herd. This intelligence will determine their strategy, their positioning, their very survival over the next 16 hours of brutal effort and split-second timing. But there's more at stake than just this single hunt. The lead runner knows that his performance today will determine his position in future hunts, his eligibility to court the elder's daughter, and his standing within the hunting society that governs so much of tribal life. The morning air carries sounds that most humans would never notice. The distant crack of breaking grass stems under massive hooves, the low rumbling communication between buffalo separated by miles of prairie, the subtle shift in bird calls that indicates the presence of large animals moving through their territory. These acoustic signatures create a three-dimensional map of buffalo location and movement that experienced hunters can read as clearly as tracking visible sign. The elder cocks his head slightly, listening to frequencies and patterns that took him decades to learn to interpret, building a mental picture of herd size and disposition that will guide every decision made over the coming hours. But there's something else in the morning air, a tension that speaks of more than just the upcoming hunt. Buffalo don't simply wander. They flow across the landscape like water finding the path of least resistance, following ancient migration routes carved into their collective memory over thousands of years. Understanding this flow, predicting where it will carry the herd, separates the hunters who return with meat from those who return with stories of the ones that got away. Today, however, the normal patterns seem somehow different. The buffalo are moving with an urgency that suggests external pressure, perhaps pressure from rival hunting parties working the same herd from the opposite direction. The possibility of competition adds a layer of danger that transforms an already perilous enterprise into something approaching warfare. Other tribes, equally desperate for winter meat, may be closing on the same herd from different angles, and encountering hostile hunters in the midst of a buffalo drive could turn deadly in seconds. The elder has seen such encounters before, confused melees where buffalo stampede in all directions, while hunters from different tribes find themselves fighting for their lives against both animals and humans. The weapons designed for killing buffalo work equally well on human targets, and the chaos of a broken buffalo drive provides perfect cover for settling tribal grievances that may stretch back generations. By mid-morning, the true work begins. The hunters spread across 3 miles of prairie, each man taking position according to a plan as intricate as any military campaign. They're setting up what their grandfathers called drive lines, invisible corridors created with strips of hide tied to wooden stakes, bundles of sagebrush arranged in subtle barriers, and the strategic placement of human scent to guide the buffalo toward the killing ground. The geography here is perfect for their purposes. A natural funnel where the rolling prairie narrows between 2 low ridges before dropping suddenly into a steep-sided coulee. At the bottom of this natural trap, the hunters have spent weeks constructing a pound, a circular enclosure of interwoven branches and packed earth that will hold the buffalo once they plunge down the cliff face. The pound represents months of preparation, countless hours of hauling timber from distant groves, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who learned to turn the buffalo's own momentum against them. But it also represents something more personal and immediate, the difference between children who grow strong through the winter and children who weaken and die from malnutrition before the spring grass returns. Every branch woven into the pound's walls, every stake driven into the frozen ground, every careful calculation of angle and height carries the weight of family survival. The elder remembers too well the winter when the hunts failed, when they were forced to boil leather scraps and search for cached food that had spoiled in the unexpected warmth of an early thaw. He remembers the hollow eyes of children who cried themselves to sleep from hunger, the difficult decisions about which families would receive the last scraps of dried meat, the way hope gradually drained from adult faces as winter stretched on without relief. 3 runners take position on the far side of the herd, their role the most dangerous of all. They will become human decoys, presenting themselves just long enough to spook the buffalo in the right direction before disappearing into carefully prepared hiding spots. One wrong step, one moment of hesitation, and they'll be trampled into the earth by hooves that could shatter stone. The runners check their escape routes one final time, memorizing every buffalo wallow, every slight depression that might offer momentary shelter if the plan goes wrong. Each man has already spoken privately with his family, sharing words that might be the last they ever exchange. In the space of a few heartbeats, they could go from skilled hunters providing for their people to broken bodies, fertilizing grass that will grow green over their bones. The main body of hunters positions themselves along the drive, lines, invisible from the buffalo's perspective but ready to emerge at precisely the right moment to maintain the herd's momentum toward the cliff. Each man carries not just his weapons but also noisemakers, rattles made from dried gourds filled with stones, strips of hide that will crack like thunder when snapped, anything that will add to the chaos and keep the buffalo moving forward when their instincts scream at them to turn aside. From his position on the ridge overlooking the pound, The elder watches the great herd through eyes that have seen this dance between predator and prey play out dozens of times. But he also knows that no two hunts are exactly alike, that the buffalo possess an intelligence and unpredictability that can turn a carefully planned ambush into a disaster. The wind shifts slightly, carrying new scents, and he raises his hand in a subtle signal that tells his hunters to adjust their positions accordingly. The afternoon sun beats down mercilessly as the runners begin their approach. They move like ghosts across the prairie, using every fold in the land to stay invisible until the crucial moment. The buffalo, massive and seemingly slow, are actually extraordinarily alert to danger. Their eyesight may be poor, but their hearing is acute, and their sense of smell can detect a human presence from miles away if the wind is wrong. Everything depends on perfect timing and the runner's ability to appear suddenly enough to startle the herd without giving them time to scatter in the wrong direction. The lead runner emerges from a shallow draw directly in front of the herd's path, waving a piece of bright-colored hide and shouting at the top of his lungs. The effect is immediate and spectacular. The lead buffalo, a massive bull whose shoulders stand taller than a man, throws up his great head and snorts in alarm. Behind him, hundreds of animals begin to shift and mill, their collective nervous energy building toward the explosion that will either carry them toward the trap or scatter them across 20 miles of prairie. For a heartbeat that seems to last forever, the outcome hangs in balance. Then the bull turns toward the northeast, away from the runner's position, and the entire herd begins to move. What starts as a nervous shuffle quickly builds into a trot, then a canter, then the full thundering charge that shakes the earth and can be heard from miles away. The ground literally trembles beneath the hunter's feet as 10,000 hooves begin to pound in unison toward the carefully prepared killing ground. Now comes the most critical phase of the hunt. As the buffalo stream between the drive lines, hunters emerge from concealment to keep the herd moving in the right direction. They appear and disappear like spirits, showing themselves just long enough to turn a wayward group back toward the main flow before melting into the grass again. One hunter, positioned too close to the herd's edge, finds himself staring into the red eyes of a massive cow who has broken from the main group. For a terrible moment, man and beast regard each other across 10 yards of empty space. Then the cow wheels and crashes back into the flowing mass of her companions, leaving the hunter shaking with adrenaline and the knowledge that death had just passed within arm's reach. The sound when the leading buffalo reached the cliff is unlike anything in nature. A crack, like the earth itself, splitting open, followed by the rumbling crash of bodies hitting stone and earth 40 feet below. The animals at the front of the herd, pressed forward by the irresistible momentum of thousands behind them, have no choice but to leap into the void. Some die instantly from the impact, their necks snapping as they strike the rocky bottom of the coulee. Others, cushioned by the bodies of those who fell before them, struggle to their feet only to be crushed by the continuing avalanche of flesh and bone descending from above. The hunters who constructed the pound watch in grim satisfaction as their trap functions exactly as designed. The circular enclosure, invisible to the buffalo until the moment of impact, channels the surviving animals into an inescapable pen where they mill in confusion and terror. Here, with the natural advantage of elevation and the buffalo contained within the pound's walls, the hunters can do their deadly work with bow and atlatl, sending stone-tipped projectiles into vital spots with the precision that comes from a lifetime of practice. But even now, with the main body of the herd trapped and helpless, danger stalks the hunting ground. A wounded bull, maddened by pain and terror, charges the pound's wall with enough force to splinter the carefully constructed barrier. Hunters scatter as the massive animal bursts through their trap, blood streaming from a dozen wounds but still powerful enough to kill any man unlucky enough to be caught in his path. The bull makes it perhaps 50 yards before the accumulated damage brings him down, but his desperate charge reminds everyone present that even a mortally wounded buffalo possesses the power to destroy those who underestimate him. From his position overlooking the killing ground, The elder watches the systematic completion of the hunt with eyes that have seen too much death to feel triumph, but enough hunger to feel profound relief. Arrow by arrow, spear thrust by carefully aimed spear thrust, the hunters complete their grim work. The great thunder of hooves fades to a few last isolated struggles, then to silence broken only by the wind across the prairie and the labored breathing of men who have just completed one of the most dangerous endeavors known to their people. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, the character of the work changes completely. Where there was violence and chaos only hours before, now there is reverence and careful precision. The hunters approach each fallen buffalo with the solemnity of men, who understand that they have just taken the lives of creatures whose sacrifice will sustain their families through the approaching winter. Each animal is examined with respect, each cut made with purpose, each portion of meat and hide allocated according to traditions that ensure no part of the animal is wasted. The work is backbreaking and endless. Buffalo are enormous animals. A mature bull can weigh as much as 6 men, and processing their carcasses requires strength, endurance, and skill that few people in the modern world could comprehend. Using knives chipped from obsidian and flint, scrapers carved from buffalo shoulder blades, and tools fashioned from bone and antler, the hunters begin the systematic dismantling of animals that will provide not just food, but clothing, shelter, tools, and fuel for the coming months. The women of the hunting party, who have been waiting in the temporary camp established upwind of the killing ground, now join the work with their own specialized knowledge and tools. They know which cuts of meat will dry well for winter storage, which portions should be eaten fresh, and how to render the fat that will provide essential calories during the lean months ahead. Their hands, stained red with blood and grease, move with the efficiency of countless generations of women who learned that winter survival depended on their ability to process and preserve the gifts that the buffalo provide. Steam rises from the opened carcasses as the internal heat meets the cooling evening air. The smell is overwhelming. Blood and meat and the musky scent of buffalo hide mixed with the smoke from fires where strips of flesh already sizzle on drying racks. Children too young to help with the heavy work gather bones for tools and ornaments, while dogs that have followed the hunting party fight over scraps and offal. Nothing is wasted. Nothing can be wasted. In a world where the next successful hunt might be weeks or months away, every ounce of protein, every strip of usable hide, represents the difference between comfort and suffering in the dark months ahead. The elder moves among the workers like a living library, sharing knowledge that exists nowhere else in the world. He shows a young hunter how to follow the grain of the muscle when cutting meat for drying, demonstrates the proper way to remove a hide without nicking the precious surface that will become winter clothing, and explains which bones will make the best needles and awls. This knowledge, accumulated over thousands of years of buffalo hunting, cannot be found in any book or scroll. It lives only in the memories and hands of men and women who learned it from their grandparents and will pass it to their children. As darkness approaches, the work takes on an almost sacred quality. Fires burn throughout the butchering ground, their light flickering off the concentrated faces of people engaged in work that connects them directly to the fundamental realities of survival. There are no grocery stores on the prairie, no supply chains that can deliver protein when winter hunger sets in. There is only the knowledge gained through generations of experience, the strength to do work that would break modern people, and the wisdom to understand that every successful hunt is a gift that should never be taken for granted. One of the younger hunters, exhausted by the day's effort, pauses in his work to watch the elder skin a buffalo cow with movements so practiced they seem almost effortless. The old man's hands know exactly where to make each cut, how much pressure to apply, when to use the knife, and when to use leverage and careful pulling. Watching him work is like watching a master craftsman ply his trade, except that the stakes here are not artistic satisfaction, but the survival of an entire community through the coming winter. The night air carries the sounds of industry mixed with exhaustion, the scrape of stone tools against bone, the soft conversations of people too tired to speak loudly, the occasional grunt of effort as someone wrestles with a particularly challenging piece of butchering. Above it all, the stars begin to appear in a sky unmarked by the light pollution that will someday obscure them. In this darkness, the hunters and their families work by firelight and starlight, connected to rhythms of life and death that stretch back to the very beginning of human presence on these vast grasslands. By full darkness, the worst of the work is finished. Meat hangs on temporary drying racks constructed from buffalo ribs and sinew, strips of flesh already beginning their transformation into the pemmican that will sustain the hunters' families through winter. Hides are staked out on the ground, ready for the scraping and processing that will turn them into clothing, shelter, and the 1,000 other necessities that buffalo provide to people clever enough to use every part of the animal. The hunters gather around the largest fire, their faces gaunt with exhaustion but marked also with the satisfaction of men who have successfully completed one of the most challenging and dangerous endeavors their culture knows. They share strips of freshly roasted meat, the rich fat running down their chins, their bodies already beginning the process of storing the calories they will need for the long journey back to their main camp. The meat tastes like survival, like security, like the difference between a winter of plenty and a winter of want. Around them, the night sounds of the prairie begin to assert themselves. Coyotes call to each other across the darkness, drawn by the smell of fresh blood, but kept at bay by the fires and the presence of so many humans. An owl hoots from somewhere in the distance, its cry answered by another far across the grassland. The wind rustles through the dry grass with a sound like whispered secrets, carrying scents and messages across miles of empty land. This is a world where humans exist only by virtue of their intelligence, their cooperation, and their deep understanding of the natural forces that surround them. The elder sits slightly apart from the others, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he watches the younger hunters celebrate their success. He has seen this scene dozens of times before, yet each successful hunt feels like a small miracle. Tomorrow, they will begin the long process of moving the processed meat back to their main camp, where other families wait anxiously for news of the hunt's outcome. The day after that, they will begin planning the next hunt, because winter is coming and buffalo don't always cooperate with human schedules. In the dying firelight, as the conversation gradually fades to whispered exchanges between exhausted men, the elder considers the weight of knowledge that rests on his shoulders. Everything these people know about survival on the Great Plains, when to hunt, where to hunt, how to read the signs that predict buffalo movement, how to construct traps that can hold animals weighing thousands of pounds, all of it exists only in human memory. There are no written records, no manuals or guidebooks. If something happens to the people who carry this knowledge, it dies with them. The young runner who distinguished himself during the day's hunt approaches the elder with a question about wind patterns and their effect on buffalo behavior. As the old man answers, sharing insights gained through decades of observation and experience, the eternal cycle continues. Knowledge passed from one generation to the next through spoken words and demonstrated techniques. This is how human cultures survive in environments that would quickly kill individuals foolish enough to face them alone. This is how people who possess no tools more sophisticated than stone knives and wooden spears can successfully hunt animals that individually outweigh them by thousands of pounds. They spoke of what they knew: wind, grass, spoor, the turning of the sun. Beyond the next ridge were only more ridges. Beyond the river, only more river. What would come in other ages was no concern of this fire. Tonight, hands had worked, the land had answered, and the people would see winter through. Tonight, however, such concerns feel remote and insubstantial compared to the immediate reality of successful hunt, full bellies, and the knowledge that his people will face the coming winter with adequate stores of meat and fat. Tonight, the ancient rhythm of predator and prey, hunter and hunted, continues as it has for thousands of years. Tonight, human intelligence and cooperation have once again triumphed over the raw power of nature's largest land animals. As the last hunter banks his fire and prepares to sleep under the vast canopy of stars, the elder speaks the words that mark the end of every successful buffalo hunt. They are simple words, worn smooth by generations of repetition, but they carry the weight of gratitude and respect for the animals whose sacrifice will sustain human life through another winter cycle. "We sleep once more," the elder said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough to reach the ears of those still awake. "Tomorrow, we follow the wind the buffalo leave behind." Around him, the prairie settles into the deep quiet of night, broken only by the distant calls of scavengers drawn to feast on what the hunters could not carry away. The fires burn lower, casting dancing shadows on the faces of men and women who have just completed work that connects them directly to the most fundamental realities of survival. In a world without safety nets, without stored surplus, without any guarantee that tomorrow's hunt will be as successful as today's, they have secured another victory in humanity's endless struggle to wrest sustenance from an environment that offers no mercy to the unprepared. The great herds will move on with the morning, following migration routes established long before the first human footprint marked these grasslands. And the hunters will follow them, as their fathers followed them, and their fathers' fathers before that, in the eternal dance between human intelligence and animal instinct that has shaped life on the plains since the first hunter learned to read the wind and the grass and the subtle signs that spell the difference between feast and famine. This is how people lived when the world was larger and emptier, when survival demanded not just individual skill but collective wisdom, when every successful hunt was a testament to human cooperation in the face of overwhelming natural forces. This is the world before horses, before steel, before the technologies that will eventually make such hunting unnecessary and eventually impossible. This is 1491. And this is how the buffalo sustained the peoples of the Great Plains in the years before everything changed forever.